we rolling? Okay, I want to welcome everyone tonight. We are here at Chez New in Redwood City. This is an event hosted by the Republican Assembly of the San Francisco Peninsula. We have a number of candidates here tonight that are going to speak to you about their races. My name is Kristen Hurley, and I'm actually the campaign manager for Peter Hernandez, who will be our first speaker. I'll tell you a little bit about Peter. So Peter is running for Congress in District 18, California District 18, which is a new district. We all have redistricted areas this year, and District 18 encompasses downtown San Jose, East San Jose, the Allen Rock area, and then moves on down the 101 corridor all the way through Morgan Hill Gilroy, the Salinas Valley, all the way through King City, and all the way essentially to the bottom of Monterey County. It also includes San Benito County, and it also includes a portion of Santa Cruz County, which is Watsonville, the Pajaro Valley. So aside from downtown San Jose and part of East San Jose, it's a very rural district. Farming and ag is big, small towns. Salinas is probably the biggest population center south of San Jose. And Peter Hernandez himself hails from San Benito County, born and raised in Hollister. He's currently a county supervisor in the county of San Benito, where he's the chair of the board. And Peter has a unique perspective on what it means to be a Republican, and Republicanism and conservatism. And being a Hispanic man, he is dedicated to making the connections with these values and the heritage of the Hispanic people in California, who make up actually the majority of the District 18 area. So Peter loves being out on the street, meeting the constituents of the district and expressing his love for the people of farm and ag communities and the industry, and how he thinks he can best represent them. Now, his district, the opponent in the district is Joe Lofgren. She comes from Silicon Valley. She's been in Congress many years, almost 3 decades. And she has represented San Jose and Silicon Valley. Essentially, no one south of that knows her name. It's a very interesting dynamic. It's an interesting race. And so here's Peter Hernandez to tell you a little bit more about himself.
It actually is a joy to have my campaign manager speak for me. She's become a dear friend. She's amazing. She has a lot of passion for our campaign. So like Chris said, my name is Peter Hernandez. I'm a San Benito County native, county supervisor. So basically grew up in an immigrant family, right? Born and raised. Basically, my parents are first generation from Mexico. I'm first generation from basically born here, right? First generation Mexican American. And my mom actually worked the fields. I tell the story. My mom worked the fields 30 years. My dad was a butcher. Back in those days, when you were a butcher, it was considered a trade, right? So they used to call him maestro, right? That means teacher in Spanish. So. And one of the most profound elements I like to share is when my dad was actually learning his citizenship, right? He, eventually wanted to become an American citizen, and he actually was sharing with me a portion of his citizenship, which had to do with him remembering or rehearsing the Declaration of Independence. And his primary language was Spanish, so you can only imagine how hard that was for him to do that. But it just filled me with pride to know that my father was trying to learn how to be not just part of the American fabric, but ultimately teaching me the values that that came from Mexico, which is our native country, right? So, and I definitely wanted to share about the unique opportunity with this race, because the going sentiment has always been that because you're Latino, you're officially a Democrat, right? And historically, there's been truth to that. That's not to say that there hasn't. But the hardest part has been is how it's translated into not just what the representation truly is supposed to look like, but obviously now the chaos that's happening with this top-down process. So when it comes down to basically the issues that we've been dealing with as a county supervisor, I try to iterate that a lot, is everything's very top-down. We're dealing with unfunded mandates. Basically, there's this assumption that we have actual legislators that are trying to figure out solutions for our communities, but the reality is we're dealing with, and I'm not saying everybody, right, but we do have a supermajority Democrat state in the legislature that basically positions itself to ultimately right it was something like 800 laws this last year. All that means is it's becoming a burden on the people themselves that they're supposed to be intending to serve. Like the declaration, one of the grievances is the founders basically argued that he has erected a multitude of offices to harass the people and eat out their substance, right? So if there was anything prophetic about the past in some of these iterations, it was, you have now a strength. This administrative state has become so egregious that it controls the people's ability. We saw this very clearly through the last 2 years in the shutdowns. And that's what actually kind of made me a little bit of a name in my county, because I wouldn't accept that reality as a Christian man, as a proud Christian man. I'm a father of 4, right? I have 2 little ones, a 2-year-old and an 8-year-old. And as a Christian man, I knew that my convictions wouldn't allow me to just have a process happen where there was contradictory elements. I knew the Constitution and the founders never intended for our laws to be arbitrary, right? When you think about an arbitrary law, that means there's contradictions in the way that it applies. It's hurt a lot of people, and it's disengaged the public. And that was one of the biggest realities that I saw as a county supervisor, is that you actually had so much hopelessness out there with the shutdowns, right? People losing their businesses. You also had students basically struggling, not just academically, but mentally. I actually said in an article, so April 28, 2020, I called the day that defined the course of my convictions. That was the day that on the dais I challenged the public health officer. And I did it. It's funny because people attack me for what I did. I own it, and I'm proud of what I did. And it wasn't so much that I tried to do it for the sake of trying to puff up my chest. The reality is I was just as intent on learning my authority as much as I was on exercising my increased crime. So all of that to be said is those are the kind of things that I dealt with as a county supervisor. Now running for Congressional District 18, my goal is I call it the 3 R's. It's renewing the rule of law. So when you think about the rule of law, it's the application of the Constitution, respecting the local authority. I exercise that local authority, and I also, now my focus is going to be what does it mean for the federal government to have enumerated powers when we finally put them back in the box where they belong, and ultimately restrict their authority to ultimately impede on the locals and take away their individual rights, because that's exactly what's been happening, right? And then obviously, my opponent, she was one of the supporters of HR 1280, which is basically the George Floyd Injustice Act. So all that did is encourage defunding the police, and it also is intent on basically taking away what they call qualified immunity, which is basically the authority that the sheriff's department, the police department have when they go through the process to make sure that they have protections as they exercise their authority, against a criminal, as an example, right? That they have due process and they have protections, so they ultimately have more of a motivation to protect you when they're out there, right? Because they're dealing with very tough situations when they're out trying to prevent crime. So the second one is reviving to be just outrageous, right? So the reality is these are the kind of the downward spirals that we've been seeing for a really long time, and it takes basically a very engaged person, right? Someone that's willing to learn the process and get engaged to address it. So I want to restore parents' rights, right? I want to have school choice. I want to have elements of voucher programs, things that start to restore the authority of the parent when it comes to the legislative process, right? At the end of the day, I firmly believe that when you actually empower and educate the public, not only they're engaged, but they're the ones that are going to actually help you when it comes to your policy. I also I forgot to mention, I'm a small business owner. I see things through a policy perspective. Right? You have to have that sentiment of what you're doing as a business owner to produce a product or a service that is obviously beneficial enough for someone to be willing to take that money out of their pocket in exchange for whatever you have to offer. The consumer, when it comes to a legislator, is the constituent. And if they're not feeling the benefit of your decisions, by default, then there should be a level of accountability. And that's why I firmly believe in local control. Restricting the federal government, put it in its box to do its job, and handing down that authority to the locals. And then the last one is reviving the middle class. So the middle class, in and of itself, the SBA, the Small Business Administration, it's clear. The middle class, the small business economy is the strongest economy, the biggest mover and shaker as the engine in the American economy. And that's because you have, and I've learned this firsthand as a small business owner, is we figure out how to adapt to different market demands and trends, right? To recessionary cycles. We can basically change our business model and be able to adapt, right? And we are the risk takers, so we're by default motivated, but we're also the ones that are entrepreneurial in spirit, right? We figure out ways to create new things, especially in the midst of a struggle, which is funny how our country was formed in a struggle, and I really believe that is part of the American fabric. And that is really the heart of the small business owner and the individual, is we find a way to solve problems in the midst of tough times. You have to have that strengthening the middle class, right? You're dealing with now, a lot of chaos happening, not just at the southern border, but with just crazy spending, right? We have the Inflation Reduction Act, which does nothing to reduce inflation. And this is, I would say, one big point when it comes down to why education is really important with the public, is the Inflation Reduction Act is a spending bill. There's nothing in it that actually is even honest to try to tell you that their goal is to reduce inflation. I don't know anybody that says, I'm going to reduce my expenses by putting things on a credit card, or I'm going to actually use my savings account to spend on my utility bills, right? So that's contradictory, but that's the reality of what the federal government and this administration is trying to sell you on. So when it comes down to the middle class, we have to rein in, we have to have a balanced budget amendment, right? We have to cut the credit card, no more spending, we got to set a cap on spending, and we got to get back to the place where we start to increase or deregulate the economy, allow the businesses and the community, right, the people themselves to be able to move freely and basically build individual wealth. We're getting away from that, and that's exactly what's destroying our economy. So, one final point. One of the proudest elements I think that I've really had in learning what it means to work across the aisle. I'm actually not just the chair of the Board of Supervisors. I was actually nominated by a Democrat majority board, right? So they nominated me to be chair of the board because I know how to work with people. So just as much as I challenge, I have strong convictions. It's funny because when I challenged that process, they actually brought me back, even after 2 years of chaos, to be the chair of the Board of Supervisors. But that means by default is I have to be engaged. So the passion that I've had, not just in office, through these last years, it's really opened up my eyes to the importance of you, to people, engaging you, to making sure we're bringing you into this process. The reality is I can't be in office forever. I firmly prescribe to term limits. Jeff Foreman and other congressional candidates are signing up for the contract with California, and there's 8 strong points. One of them is term limits, but the reality is there needs to be a stronger commitment from the candidate where we're telling you what we're going to do when we're in office, not just telling you what we're going to do to get into office. Right? We actually have to make a commitment that we deliver the goods and come back and actually restore this country, right? Piece by piece, and it's going to take a lot of work. So along that same vein, I'm actually the vice chair of the local CRA in San Benito County. The reason why I had that passion to build the local CRA is because God really showed me something. Is we're really not going to save this nation by a bunch of elected officials. It's the people, right? The reality is it's the people themselves. They're the ones that understand once they understand the civic process, they understand what it means to restore that civic process at the local level, individual empowerment. But that means we have to build the grassroots. My campaign has been very grassroots. We've been working really, really hard. So as a CRA vice chair, my goal is to educate the public. When I get into office, my goal is to be very present in my district and make sure I engage the public to be part of this process, to understand what they're losing, right? Why freedom matters. I firmly believe freedom is a virtue. I've learned that in these last 2 years. You actually have to work for it, because when you're in an environment of risk, government tells you it's our job to take away your risk. That's never been Americanism. So when it comes down to this race, Congressional District 18, 346,000 registered voters. Half of that voting block 51% of it is Latino. It's a majority Latino district. Everything south of Gilroy, basically all the way down to King City area, Watsonville is a little bit off to the west. But the majority of this district is Latino. It's also officially rural, it's ag, it's middle class. It's everything that I am and Zoe's not. So when people ask me what is the pathway to victory to this, It's going right into the heart of this district and touching and talking to and encouraging the Latino Democrat voter and letting them know we care, and it's our goal to win you over, to let you know that you can trust us, because we want to there's one thing that I know as I've gone out and worked the district. When you talk to the Latino, and obviously I'm talking to everybody, I'm winning over everybody. We're working San Jose, we're working the Vietnamese community, we're working the whole district. But just specifically referencing the majority of this district, is the Latino community cares about their faith, they care about their family, they care about their individuality. Those are the things that make us tick. You can't strip that away from us. I wrote an article called Wokeism is Not a Latino Value. I was very intentional in highlighting the reality that there's a generational element that makes us proud as Latinos, because we love God, we love our family, and we love our ability to pick ourselves up off our own bootstraps. That is Americana. That is what it means to be an American. That means we don't make excuses for ourselves. We don't want to make excuses. We just want an opportunity. And that's the difference between the Republican and the Democrat mantra. Republican says as long as we have the opportunity, we'll take the bull by the horns, and we will make sure to be successful. But the Democrat mantra says, no, stay home and just take an unemployment check. All the while you're only encouraging poverty, right? There's devastation with the leftist progressive mindset. Joe Lofgren is very much that mindset. I'm not. So again, Congressional District 18, like I shared, it's Latino, it's rural, it's middle class. I am Congressional District 18. Thank you.